Hi, I'm Wendy Ogilvie, Director of Environmental Programs at the Grand Valley Metro Council. I'm pleased to introduce Dan Schoonmaker. Dan was named Executive Director of the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum in 2013, a new role created to position the organization for growth and innovation. He is a graduate of Aquinas College and Grand Rapids Community College. Among other distinctions, he is a lead accredited professional with the U.S. Green Building Council and a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps.
Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I am the Executive Director of the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I would like to welcome you to Normalizing Climate Resiliency for Business and Institutions in West Michigan. I'd also like to thank the Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds for hosting my presentation, and apologize to them and to you that I don't have the latest version of PowerPoint, so this will be a an audio presentation only. But if you're interested in what I look like, that's me in the middle there, and that's my email address if you would like to reach out to me later. So let's talk about resiliency. Our organization's been using that term for a number of years, and I think we'll be thinking about this a bit more in the near term given present events. Now, I think a great place to start is to highlight how sustainability and environmental advocates and activists have a complicated relationship with the concept of resiliency. I was at the Healing Our Waters conference 7 or so years ago and gave a presentation on the work we were doing. And folks were a bit put off by the idea of resiliency as an adaptation. There is this sort of defeatist nature about preparing for things that you're trying to prevent. But you know, to use an analogy, I am not buying the same size pants I was wearing when I was 20. And I can tell you it's a more complicated relationship when I go into the doctor's office. And I think we've got a good idea of what I could do to live a happier and healthy future in that in that way. But we're also going to talk about how I've got a bad back, and it's probably time to start adapting my behavior presently. Now, a few years ago, in a past job, I had the opportunity to work on the City of Grand Rapids Climate Resiliency Report. And through that effort, we defined climate resiliency as the ability of a community to simultaneously balance ecological, economic, and social systems to maintain or increase quality of life in an uncertain, dynamic climate future. So we basically took the triple bottom line definition of sustainability and said resilience is sustainability during uncertain times. And up until a few months ago, I think we might have said that's pretty legit. And now I think we're starting to rethink resilience as a more of a measure of survival. And to that effect, we have a formula for that. How likely is the impact, exposure? How bad will it hurt you? And what capacity do you have to adapt it? So exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity, that is your vulnerability to climate change, and the inverse of which is resiliency. Now, our organization promotes business practices that advance climate leadership, community resilience, social justice, and the creation of a circular economy through education, collaboration, and research development. We have two overarching goals: to serve as Michigan's leading organization for beyond compliance sustainability practitioners, and help communities become more resilient and equitable through sustainable business practices and partnerships. Now, we are very interested in how businesses impact community sustainability, and climate resiliency and climate adaptation have become a big part of that conversation. The most recent work we've done is focused on organizational resilience and vulnerabilities. We learned quite a bit from a project we did in partnership with the Great Lakes Integrated Sciences Assessment Center at the University of Michigan. And with them, created a toolkit that you can find on our website at WMSBF.org. Now I'm going to walk you through that over the next few minutes here. But first, I want to talk a bit about climate resiliency in a business and institutional setting. It's a confusing topic as a practical matter, even without the epistemological complications of whether your colleagues even believe in climate change. So, unless you sell carbon credits for a living, climate change is not normal business, and it's not normal at all. it is what we would think of as a wicked problem. So if you're not familiar with the term wicked problems, it's an issue that is beyond the scope and capabilities of your organization. It's generally difficult or impossible to solve, defined by incomplete or contradictory knowledge, impacts a large number of people and opinions, can have a very large economic and sometimes has an interconnected nature, so involves many different stakeholders and people. Now, there aren't too many true wicked problems. Institutional racism, economic inequality, sectarian violence, viral pandemic, and climate change. So when this happens, an issue that every organization, every person simultaneously contributes to and is impacted by. You should think of it, and in the case of climate change, you should think of it as two issues: adaptation versus mitigation. And I tell you, this just confused people I work with, especially those who are coming from the environmental health and safety field, where the term mitigation has a very specific meaning that seems counterintuitive to the definitions that we use in a more academic sense. Most institutions understand the idea of greenhouse gas reduction. What we and adaptation professionals refer to as mitigation. You're mitigating your contribution to climate change, the greenhouse gas and what have you. The impacts you are creating on the environment, your pollution. And this is where we generally start talking about things like frontline communities and equity, environmental justice, and the global idea of climate resiliency, following the same basic playbook as every environmental issue of the past 50 years, from the Love Canal to fracking to Nestle water bottles. And so businesses create climate impacts. We then talk about those impacts as a means to encourage them to reduce their emissions. Now, uniquely in the terms of this pollution vector, climate change, is that the polluter is also at risk. In Michigan, we see things like Grand River. In the global sense, here's a good example of a flood that's impacted a Honda facility. And of course, we're all familiar with the Australian wildfires from last year. Now, when we talk about adaptation and resiliency, we talk about how to respond to these issues. As it happens, some but not all of these issues are likely to be responsible for the responsibility of the same folks that manage sustainability. Those working on stormwater permits, facilities maintenance, materiality assessments for sustainability planning. So we did a project with GLESA a few years back, and we worked to create that toolkit we talked about. And that work has come to inform our general approach to advocacy and non-membership programming in a fundamental way. The concept of the forum as a boundary organization that provides a means for various constituencies, and you kind of see it on the chart there, to access the resources and experience of others. And we try to do it in a way that is meaningful and mutually beneficial to them. That is enabled by translation, sometimes literally. We have a Spanish interpreter on staff, and work towards a sense of co-production and accountability. And so we tested this with 4 representative organizations, and the first thing we did was come up with an understanding of what climate change will look like in West Michigan. And I know you have a lot of other presentations as part of this forum, so I won't hash through these too precisely. But the basic idea: temperatures rising, winter's going to be less severe and wetter, and we're going to see a lot more precipitation and a lot more intensity precipitation when it does occur, and then maybe even some occasional drought. And as a fun fact, when my 5-year-old son is 30, we can expect that the climate of our town to be approximately that of what St. Louis, Missouri is today. Here's another map that shows a very similar thing. And all of that I just shared is consistent with the City of Grand Rapids report and other reports. With understand that degrees, inches, and similar measures are unnecessary context in how we approach this issue. Now, we wanted to take that data and put it all into a framework that would be meaningful to local decision makers. So that means impacts due to weather events, resource scarcity, and resource deterioration. And universally, we're going to split those into these four functional areas: product and services, administration, facilities, equipment, and the supply chain. Now, what this looks like per industry will be dramatically different here. And as a parenthetical, this framework of impacts and business divisions is applicable to coronavirus as well, and in any host of issues. And as you're having these discussions, it's a good opportunity to think through the general sustainability and equity of your operations as well, because you can generally pull it through with these same rows and columns. Now, when we went through this process, we asked three basic questions. So, is there an impact based on current conditions? Would there be an impact if the frequency or magnitude of those were to increase? And do you have contingency or preparation plans in place? So that same exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity that I showed earlier. And the end product looks something like this. Now, first, we worked with a local bar and restaurant chain. The hospitality and food service industry is dictated by its supply chain in ways that other industries are not. Drops, crop shortages, lower yields can all impact available suppliers at the same time. The options can be limited with semiconductors and available. So national supply chain issues came up. Now, an organization of reasonable size can work with suppliers to support resiliency and work through this. Now, on a facility standpoints and a larger continuity plan standpoints, the long story short was when we came in and talked to them about how specific impacts might disrupt their operations, there's kind of this moment of, well, we have no plan. We would just shut down the location. We'd move. And I think as coronavirus is tested over the past few months, that's proven reasonably accurate. Now, we did have a consultant come in to speak at one of our events not long ago, and he shared out some of the work he was doing with New Orleans. That's been hit with a number of catastrophic hurricanes over the past 2 decades, the largest of which being Hurricane Katrina. And he found that less than half of businesses have an emergency plan. That larger businesses tend to be the ones that do have a plan, and that franchise restaurants were the most ready, which seems to align with the current results we're seeing as tested by coronavirus. Small local independent businesses have proven to be the most vulnerable operational. Something that I think we should think about a little more as a community, and it seems like we're doing present. So going back to the issue of climate in this context, there is a factor of disruption versus inconvenience. And the materiality of which, something I believe Beth Givens from ASAP is likely to talk about in a separate presentation. It's pretty easy to get in the weeds on all this. Specific climate events might not shut down businesses at the hurricane or pandemic scale. With the company we work with, they were getting all their potatoes from one location in the Midwest. If that supply is impacted, there is a major disruption. You need potatoes if you're in a restaurant. And maybe you can respond to that. So while we're doing this, they were already having impacts to the menu concerning fish and other products that were becoming less available due to climate change. And I think coronavirus is testing this again. So you can use climate science to do something like scope out your menu resiliency and costs. And through the same exercise, you could be examining the sustainability of equity of your supply chain. Now, next, we worked with a global manufacturer. As a key point, emissions are global, but impacts are local. Climate change is site-specific. What is happening in West Michigan doesn't necessarily mean much to operations in Ireland or China. Those are supply chain impacts. and linked to each facility and linked to each facility and the transit in between. The regional assets tend to be external nature for manufacturers, and any commercial in any large scale commercial industrial facility. They tend to rely on a handful of single source vendors for critical infrastructure, especially water and electricity, and they could be hit by flooding. Now, the third organization we worked with in our pilot project was a hospital, which did have robust emergency management plans and procedures that required constant testing and evaluation. The impact of any single climate event was not likely to be outside of the adapted capacity of the organization. But combined impacts, that was a different story. So if you had a heat event at the same time as a power loss, that could be catastrophic. However, the largest concern here is how events impact public health and of course, critical infrastructure. And we're seeing that again play out a little bit today. And also the concept of climate change, some of the things that we had presumed never would happen, say the city of Grand Rapids water system shutting down. It seems like that is no longer entirely outside of the realm of possibility that it may have seemed like only a few years ago. And this leads us to the fourth organization we worked with, Grand Rapids Public Schools, and this isn't actually a picture of Grand Rapids Public Schools, it's just a picture I grabbed off the web. The worst case scenario for which has actually happened the following year after we did this project, and is happening presently due to COVID-19. So student learning is location-based. We put students and faculty together on a precise schedule. Any weather event can delay or cancel hours that students would typically spend in the classroom. So we need to start thinking about adapted classrooms, things like online learning. And more than that, schools are typically a community resource. Communications, emergency response, community events, those can all flow through schools. Plus, closures in themselves impact childcare, they impact food security. Some students in the pilot district work with Grand Rapids Public Schools, receiving all three of the meals from the school one day. So any effort to impact the school of closures could increase the resiliency of community as a whole. And here's a good example of how we might be able to take climate data and make it applicable to decision making. So we went through and worked with GRPS and tracked what were all the reasons that they had closings from the prior 3-year period, and tested that against climate data to see if it was likely for it to increase or decrease. And the following year, all these expectations just blew us out of the blew us out of the. Now we take all those together. We came up with some specific thresholds to tell us what our expectations would be for organizational resiliency in West Michigan. So we found that facilities could be impacted by consecutive hot days and heavy rain events, and their processes and people could be affected by freezing rain or hot days. But for the most part, the thresholds improve. Climate change in a lot of ways might make life easier, and in a lot of facilities, the assets they have are set up well to respond to the likely impacts of climate change. The big difference here, though, is in terms of local impact, is that people are going to be impacted at a greater level, and we can expect some increasing increasing level of concern and threat to what I've heard as community scale infrastructure. Think of power grids and watersheds, which is happening presently. And I think we can also think about in climate adaptation, a real need for adaptation preparation and some clear and present opportunities. One, talking about people equity, so we know that certain opportunities will be impacted more, and how do we lessen that burden? And the flip side of that, talk about community scale infrastructure, and in context of the Algro Forum, green storm infrastructure is something I think we need to start really thinking about in terms of adaptation, and all of our work today is pointed this direction. So we know storms and water is going to be our defining threat for climate change locally. I think it presents the most conspicuous overlap between institutional resiliency and community resiliency, and we're seeing that presently in all the high water levels. So this is a slide brought from a recent ECO presentation. It hasn't been updated since the pandemic shut everything down, but I think we assume that red line is going to keep trending up there, and we know that we know this is a historic event that we're living through presently. And this is from South Haven, where we have our Southwest Michigan programming, in showing how a great example of how our lakeshore communities are currently being impacted by climate. So stormwater management. Now, we've been working over the past year in partnership with American Rivers to encourage the adoption of green stormwater infrastructure as a preferable path to compliance. And one of the things we're trying really hard to promote as part of this is the need to establish connections to the local subwatersheds that are involved in Elk Grove. And I really think this is where we need to take these conversations. Because business institutions are people, and we think they're going to be more keen to adopt their practices when they understand the local water resources in their neighborhood and community. And as an extension of that, the people that are impacted and the communities and the communities downriver from their operations. And if we can get the property owners, facility managers to make that connection, I really think that's where we can start moving some of these things forward. And this aligns when we talked earlier about that project with New Orleans and the hurricanes. Now, one of the ideas that came out of that was a concept of a neighborhood resiliency champion. These are organizations and institutions that have the plans and resources to model how to make decisions, and they have the resources to adapt and survive the type of issues that occur with climate change or coronavirus, and they're able to collaborate with their neighborhood peers to overcome these wicked problems. So this is where I'm going to leave you at today. At the local scale, organizations and institutions have limited ability to respond on their own to the most conspicuous and alarming impacts of this emerging climate crisis, or any crisis at a wicked level scale. From an organizational and institutional standpoint, community resilience is organizational resilience, and that is where all these planning processes should naturally lead to, and how the forum is going to be articulating these programs in the future. So thank you. I think I let a few minutes over my time, and I'm looking forward to discussions later today.